again from WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. My name's Josh Manning. I am Deputy Managing Assignment Editor here at the Western Journal. Joining me on my right is Olivia Brown. She's a guest political consultant for us. And then joining us long distance is Cameron Arcand. He is a contributor to the Western Journal. I don't know if you can see Cameron or not. There he is. There's Cameron. Cameron, thank you for joining us long distance today. We appreciate it. We've got some good stuff we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Biden's speech last night, his first speech to the union, and exactly how misleading he was. We're going to talk about unions and what's happening over there. We're also going to talk about job losses under Biden. You know, when he took over, he immediately killed Keystone. That killed about 11,000 jobs. But folks, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what may be coming down the pipe. First off, though, we want to tell you about our sponsor today. Our sponsor is PatriotDepot.com. PatriotDepot.com. Patriot Depot supplies everything conservatives need for the conservative revolution. T-shirts, mugs, bumper stickers, all kinds of cool toys. If it's conservative, if you need it, Patriot Depot has it. And in fact, if you'll go there today, when you check out, you can put in WJ Live. You can use the promo code WJ Live. That's going to give you 20% off of your entire purchase. WJ Live over at PatriotDepot.com. So thank you guys for sponsoring us. We appreciate it. And we hope the folks watching get some great loot over there. So let's get started. Right off the bat, I think the big thing that made news this morning was analysis of President Biden's speech last night. He came out. It was Biden in his element, which is to say he had a teleprompter. Biden's element really is wrapped around a woman creepily smelling her hair. But his next best element is with a teleprompter. So he spoke last night, and I was very surprised this morning when I was looking at coverage. The New York Times actually had a fact-check piece. I really didn't expect that. I was stunned. I really thought the whole piece was going to be about how he was not President Trump and how everything he said was truthful. But it was actually so bad last night, folks, that the New York Times felt they had to run a fact-check. What I'd like to do is read a couple of things that President Biden said, read a couple of things the New York Times said in response, and then just get your thoughts, Olivia, and your thoughts, Cameron, and then we'll move on. So right off the bat, Biden said, "A year ago, we were hit with a virus that was met with silence and spread unchecked. Denials for days, weeks, then months." Now, the first thing I think of with that is Nancy Pelosi telling people to go out to Chinatown and party and things like that. And President Trump wasn't doing that, but Democrats were. But anyway, the New York Times response is following. "This is exaggerated. It is true that President Trump downplayed the severity of the coronavirus for months, but he wasn't exactly silent, and he didn't fail to respond completely. 1 year ago, on March 12, 2020, Mr. Trump delivered an address from the Oval Office acknowledging the threat and announced new travel restrictions on much of Europe. What the Times does not mention there is that was immediately portrayed as racist by the media and by the Biden
and
campaign.
xenophobic.
And xenophobic and bigoted. If they could figure out a way to work anti-LGBT in there too, they would do that. So let's, Cameron, I want to hear what you think about this. Was Trump completely silent?
No, he wasn't. In fact, I'd argue that he was probably having those press conferences fairly early. I remember March of last year, he put that coronavirus task force together, and no one really could say for sure what was going on at that time. I remember the CDC was like, "Oh, we're unsure about masks, don't go out and buy them and stuff." And then about a week ago this year, we really started to kind of figure out what was going on. President Trump and Mike Pence in particular, who is leading that task force, was there for every step of the way in a sense. And kind of in contrast to Biden today, they were more optimistic then than Biden is a year later when we have vaccines.
Olivia, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the difference with what President Trump did is that he gave Americans hope. when he was talking about the coronavirus. Like, this wasn't going to be the end for everyone, but he did everything he could to make an impact. Like the CARES Act, moving that forward so quickly, helping Americans. That was very, very, very important.
Yeah, I mean, it took no time to launch Operation Warp Speed once we figured it out. And it's Trump wasn't alone in not being able to foresee just how damaging this would be. We were all trying to get a grip on it. And once we realized how dangerous it was, Operation Warp Speed went into effect. It was Trump who, I get so excited about Trump, my voice cracks. It was Trump. I sound like Mr. Haney from Green Acres. It was Mr. Trump. But it was Trump who pulled the FDA back and said, "Hey, we're gonna get rid of some of the red tape. You guys are going to be able to move fast." And within a year, we had multiple viable vaccines. So I was surprised. This actually is where I thought the New York Times would leave him completely alone, or would cover for him at least. And the New York Times, in what was obviously an enormous accident, carried out some journalism here. The next piece that they covered was a comment from Biden. Biden said, "As of now, total deaths in America are 527,726. That's more deaths than in World War I, II, the Vietnam War, and 9/11 combined." The New York Times take on that was that that's exaggerated. According to estimates from the VA, a total of 392,000 people died in combat in those three wars, combined with 2,977 on 9/11. That figure would indeed be smaller than the coronavirus death toll Mr. Biden cited. It would also be lower than the 529,000 death figure tracked by the New York Times. But factoring in deaths that occurred in service but outside of combat, the toll for those three wars was more than 610,000. That's higher than the current total number of virus deaths Biden cited. That I'm very surprised they went into the math there and actually looked at non-combat deaths. It's truly a remarkable thing that the New York Times wouldn't try to pin all of this on Trump. Cameron, are you surprised at the tack the New York Times took on this?
A little bit. I think they've been overly friendly to Biden, and they once were overly friendly to Governor Cuomo as well. And I'm hoping maybe at some point, maybe they've fired everyone at the New York Times already that has dissenting opinions. Maybe this guy's going to be out of a job next week who did this fact check. But I am a little bit surprised that they did do this. I am impressed that they are doing that. I'm hoping they continue to hold them accountable, but I am a bit doubtful that they will.
Olivia, I have thought this is the death count was a grim sort of reminder of the Vietnam death count that Walter Cronkite would trot out every night. And really, he undermined America's effort there. I have thought the death count in general was being used to undermine the president. And I feel like I haven't seen those numbers touted nearly as much over the last, say, 6 weeks or so. What do you think?
That's definitely true, because before they were harping on all the people dying in their terms because of President Trump.
Yeah. The people
but
Trump
now,
killed.
Whoever has died within the period that Biden has been president, they don't want to focus on that.
Yeah.
They're focusing purely on within the last year, 2020, before Biden became president.
Were you surprised when, just within days of Biden's inauguration, that states started opening back up, restaurants started opening back up? It's like everything got just a little bit lighter and brighter and nicer out there.
I was very surprised by that. Exciting to see people out and about again and kind of get back to how society is supposed to be. But yeah, I was very surprised to see that even states that we didn't expect it from have now been opening up more and more.
Yeah, I think it's really fun to see that play out in California, where Gavin Newsom, it looks like, is definitely going to we don't know if he'll be recalled, but it looks like he's going to stand for it anyway. And Cuomo, who's got an enormous number of problems outside of COVID, they're loosening things up there too. Last question here, Cameron, I want to ask you, I thought a remarkable line last night was when President Biden talked about essentially, if you get the vaccine, then maybe you can have a 4th of July celebration. It wasn't clear what you could do if you didn't get the vaccine, but if you got it, maybe you could kind of have a 4th of July celebration. Right after that, Tucker Carlson said, "Who do you think you're talking to? How dare you tell Americans whether or not they can have the 4th of July?" What is your response to that, Cameron? What's your read on the psychology behind Biden saying that?
I think he's living in 1995. If I'm being completely honest, he thinks he's talking to a completely different set of Americans right now. People that I think still hold 4th of July barbecues, that haven't canceled 4th of July yet, I think aren't paying attention to Joe Biden necessarily. I don't think they've been paying attention to him anyways, in a sense. So I think this is completely going to fall on deaf ears. I think it's kind of ridiculous that he said something like this in the first place, because he was coming at it from, if we give you permission, then maybe you can hold a barbecue. And that's not how that works with this whole lockdown situation anyways. He's talking from a standpoint as if the federal government really has leverage over gatherings and stuff, when what he should really be doing is encouraging state governments to reopen their states. And that's not what we're seeing with him. We're seeing kind of mixed feelings. He did make the comment about vaccinations by May 1st, but he is not giving any sort of consistent message.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, almost none. There is consistent messaging in that it was terrible under Trump. That is a consistent message that's coming out. But you're right. Past that, and I don't know if that's because they don't have a message or he's not disciplined, or maybe a combination of the two. I'm not positive. Mm-hmm. Now, Cameron, you're a contributor to the Western Journal. You've got a piece you've been working on unions, and I would love to hear that. There wasn't a ton of talk about unions for years and years and years, and now they are really back big time. For one thing, because Trump appealed to so many union members, yet the union organizations never supported him. So, Cameron, tell us what you're working on there.
Yeah, so last week a couple of weeks ago, I put out a piece kind of about the impact of LA teachers unions and what they're doing here to fight school reopenings. Now, they just kind of had a deal with the city of Los Angeles that isn't really fully reopening whatsoever. But I did read a piece today by one of our other contributors, Elizabeth Stauffer, that basically hinted that $86 billion in the COVID stimulus bill went to paying out union pensions. It was a bailout. And these weren't public sector unions either. These were private sector unions. There was this great tweet from Brian Riddell, I think maybe we could put that up, saying that Washington spending $86 billion to bail out private pensions is an indicator of how we're going to deal with other social programs. Everyone knows that Social Security and Medicare, we keep paying into these things. We don't really know where that money is going at the end of the day, and we don't know when we're going to be at our limit with the deficit. So kind of what I wanted to ask you guys was, maybe Josh could give a good answer on this, is there any way for us to kind of solve the deficit, or are we going to keep bailing out these private entities?
I just think the question I'll ask Josh is, can we solve the most dangerous thing confronting America right now? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It's going to take fiscal discipline, which nobody in D.C. has, and decreasingly does anyone else in America. We are incredibly prosperous. We continue to bring in record federal inlays, and we even did that with Trump while taxes were cut. So, the issue is not the amount of money we can bring in. We bring in trillions and trillions of dollars. The problem is we spend many trillions more. Cameron, I don't know the answer to that, because if they continue to bail things out, that tweet referenced $100 trillion I think it's a deficit maybe, but if we like $100 trillion debt or something like that, the way they do that essentially by printing money, and you simply can't print that much money. I mean, the currency will have to be devalued at some point, and you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? Because if you raise taxes, you destroy the incentive to work. If you print more money, you inflate the currency, which is essentially a tax. And, you can truck along really nicely on inflation. In the interwar period between World War I and II, the mark inflated in Germany. It did fine for 7-8 years. And then I think it was year 9 rolled around. And all of a sudden, it took a wheelbarrow full of currency to buy a loaf of bread. So maybe the lesson with these things is that you will pay the price for inflation, but it's not a steady curve, right? It doesn't slowly go up. You inflate, and then bam, you pay for it all of a sudden, and it's deadly. So I don't know what the solution here is other than getting fiscal conservatives in there who will cut programs and explain to the American people why this has to be done. Of course, the other option is that the system crashes, is that it grows faster than we're able to fund it. Eventually, it can't meet its obligations, and then it essentially goes bankrupt, and that's a huge problem too. But, sometimes you have to endure a whole lot of pain to get things better. The first couple of years of the Reagan administration, when Volcker got interest rates under control, that was really painful to the country. If you remember, there was a lot of talk about Reagan being a one-term president, but it turns out after they did the painful stuff, the economy just absolutely exploded. I think we would see that if we'd get a handle on spending, but right now, neither Republicans nor Democrats, and certainly no one on the left, has any desire to get spending under control.
I would concur.
You are wise beyond your years. I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Cameron? Go ahead.
I would kind of build on to that point in the sense that we started these, like Social Security, that was a result of the Great Depression. That was a FDR era program. And just kind of historically speaking, that really set us up for failure now that we have this reliance on Social Security, on these government programs. And if you threaten to reform them or take them away as a means of helping the deficit, people aren't going to pay attention to that. It's going to have very little support. And just looking back historically, Social Security, they put it down as age 65 because no one was really living to 65. Yeah. And that was another added tax that they put on the American people because they were thinking they would never actually get that back. And I think we're kind of seeing
for them to confiscate funds.
Exactly. And we're seeing these policies keep continuing, and if anyone threatens to reform them or phase them out, it's absolutely very unpopular, and it's probably not going to happen anytime when I'm around.
So, Olivia, you spent a lot of time working for the Trump campaign, and then no rest for the weary. Right after that, you jetted off to Georgia to deal with both Senate races there. You have dealt with candidates who are grappling with these questions. You've also talked to voters who are trying to figure out how we solve it. What do we do about the spending problem?
That's a really big question.
that has no answer.
That I don't have an answer to. But again, it really need to focus on how we're spending our money and make sure that we're doing it wisely and making sure that we're not just throwing it away for projects that have to do with hair color and
transsexual jellyfish.
All these different things that we're wasting our money on what we could be using for life-saving things like cancer and stuff like that.
There was an interesting piece. I was watching an interview with Bjorn Lomborg. I'm not sure if either of you guys know him. He's a liberal environmentalist. But he says, look, the United States is underwriting green energy to the tune of about $100 billion a year. He says, forget underwriting, and it produces no energy, like less than 5% of the energy that goes into the grid is green. Instead of spending $100 billion, why not get together with Europe, spend about $30 billion total, and try to figure out how to deal with like real long-term green alternatives, hydrogen power, I don't know, thorium reactors. There's really licking cold fusion or something like that. He says that what you do is you gamble on something that's 40 years out. You don't try to solve it with insufficient technology that we have today, but we're spending all of this money, to your point, I think, stupidly, when we could be spending a lot less, a lot smarter, and get a whole lot more for it, get a whole lot more in return. Exactly. So we talked about Biden last night. We talked about Biden and the Congress helping bail out unions. Now, one of the interesting things that happened right as Biden took office is he cut Keystone. Now, with that, we saw, depending on whom you asked, we saw between 5,000 and 11,000 union jobs just go up in smoke. But Olivia, you've got information here saying that, look, maybe that's a drop in the bucket. It may be millions and not just a couple million jobs.
Yeah, we have a lot we have to talk about.
Yeah.
So today I'm here to talk about the PRO Act, and that was just recently passed in the House about a week ago, and it has been fully endorsed by the Biden-Harris administration. It's very important to know what the PRO Act is, how it's similar to other laws that have been passed previously. First of all, what is the PRO Act stand for? It stands for Protecting the Right to Organize, Act of 2021.
So that, following a normal congressional rule, it means the exact opposite of that.
What it is doing. It is not protecting the American people, it is protecting the labor unions. That's important to know who they are protecting when you talk about that. So what it's going to do, the PRO Act will supersede right-to-work states. Right? Currently, we are in a right-to-work state, Arizona, and what that means, most simply, is that you have the ability to be employed without having to join a union. So now
They can't make you join.
They can't make you join a union in Arizona. In other states there's 27 states that you can. Out of the other 50, those you can't. However, what that means is you can't decide whether you want to be in a union or not. So for me, what I thought of as an analogy for that would be if I was forced into a gym membership, but I like hiking, I like being outdoors. I'd rather be outdoors than pay to be on a treadmill, but I'm having to pay dues, which with most labor unions you have to pay dues on. But instead I'd be paying for that gym membership. That's the best way that I could.
That you would never use.
That I would never use.
And they take it straight out of your bank account.
Exactly.
Essentially, that's what happens with union dues, is they pull it out of your paycheck, you never see it.
And a lot of the time, people don't know where it's going. It's very interesting to see the Center for Union Facts. It showed that from 2010 to 2017, that $1.3 billion were spent to Democrat political organizations, 99% Democrat. There was a 1% that were given to
So
Republican.
1% of that 1.9 billion?
Yes,
like
some of these were Planned Parenthood, the Democratic Governors Association. There's so many, and people, firefighter unions, they don't know their money's going there. So it's very important to know where your money's going, and the PRO Act would be forcing you to be a part of a labor union, whether you wanted to or not. The next important part of it is to know, why are the Democrats making this look so appealing? The way that they are marketing it. If you have that tweet that they put up, it's from the American Federation of Labor and Congress. So you laugh when you see it. But it reminds me of a Carly Rae Jepsen song, the way that they made it, how they really, 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 really think it's time to pass the PRO Act, just like her song, I Really, 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 Really Like You. That's what I think when I see that. They're trying to get this younger demographic excited about the PRO Act and not talking about how that's endangering their future. The most second important thing would be that it is going to essentially outlaw freelance work.
So when you talk about freelance, what do you mean there?
So it's based off of the California Assembly Bill 5. which went through in 2018. And that has been disastrous to the California's economy.
So these
Maybe
are
I could
folks
add-
like Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, Airbnb people.
Way more than that.
The gig economy.
The gig economy, but even someone that's an independent contractor as a doctor or a lawyer.
Or perhaps a contributor to the Western
Contributor,
Journal, like
yeah.
Cameron.
Exactly. So you wouldn't, this would be on a national scale of what they did in California, redefining what it means to be an employee and an independent contractor. And there are, since 2019, have been 57 million Americans that are within this purview of freelance work, independent contractors who would be out of jobs, just like Cameron would be out of a job underneath if this is completely passed through.
Well, we got to fight this for Cameron, if nothing else.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, folks who are watching, look at that face. Do you want that fella to be out of a job? Fight the PRO Act.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm here in
it's
California, so...
because-
Oh, you're in California?
Yeah, I'm here in California, so hopefully the feds aren't listening to this too loudly, but we basically have AB5 was an absolute disaster for this state to the point where Uber and Lyft threatened to shut down, and that would have put hundreds of thousands of gig workers just out of business so quickly. We had Prop 12, which passed, which allowed these people to continue being independent contractors. But what this essentially does is if you use a rideshare app or if you use something like Instacart or apps like that, what the PRO Act will do if it redefines what it means to be a gig employee, then they're going to be out of work and you won't really be able to use these services. And Uber and Lyft threaten that here in California. They can threaten to do that nationwide too.
That's what they're trying to do. Trying to make this nationwide.
So not 11,000 jobs. These are 57 million jobs. And these folks do all kinds of stuff. It's not like it's an obscure thing. These are Uber drivers. These are people who provide a service. There wouldn't be those 57 million jobs if people didn't want the service they're offering. And the government is trying to basically end this so that unions can prosper.
Yes.
Cameron, you have any thoughts on that past what you just said?
Yeah, so kind of what you guys are saying, it's to essentially help the unions in every way, shape, or form. The person who introduced the bill here in California was a labor union organizer, and she basically made money for getting people to join unions. And I can basically guarantee you right now something similar is probably happening in the House of Congress where people are benefiting from this. It's the union leaders, it's people who are fairly well off because they are these organizers, and they're the ones benefiting from this. This is not the average person, and it's going to effectively kill the gig economy if the proper reforms aren't made and if this ultimately ends up passing. It's a disaster.
Yeah, it's cronyism. It's the federal government and capitalists kind of cozying up to each other, and the unions saying, "Hey, give us a little bit of preferential treatment. We'll keep kicking 1.9 billion, something like that, your way.
1.3 billion.
1.3 billion your way." It's funny. My son and I were talking about this last week, and I used an example of Uber drivers and cabs in New York. I think it was Thomas Sowell who wrote this, or maybe Walter Williams a while back. To start a cab company in New York, you have to have a medallion. It's essentially a license that says, "Hey, I can run a cab." And I asked my son, "Hey, how much do you think those medallions cost?" And he's 13, and he thought for a minute, and he said $50. And I said, "Well, it's a little bit more than that. The last piece I read on it, it's $250,000. $250,000 to get a medallion." Now, what that effectively does is make sure that there are no independent cab drivers. They're all working for just one or two or three companies. So it's really anti-competitive. It stifles competition. And really, that's why they want this. That's why a lot of cab companies hated Uber, because Uber was undercutting them. People were getting their rides, and they were paying less money, and it was much more comfortable. And the cabs all of a sudden had competition, which they hadn't had before. So it's crony capitalism. It's unions getting in there and trying to use the power of government to feather their own nests.
And I think that it can, in the future, move towards even more government takeover with little bits being like with freelancing. I feel like there's a professional autonomy that you have and independence. And in America, declaring independence wasn't just, writing a letter to move away from England. It was an independent spirit. And so I think it's critically important to know that people, it could get to the point where they're not deciding what they want to do. I always think I have this family friend who their cousin was from Poland. And she tells me this story of how her cousin was a dentist. Not because he wanted to be a dentist, but because the Polish government said, you have to be a dentist.
Oh, that was back. Yeah, that was back in the Soviet days. Yeah.
And not because he liked teeth, not because he was enamored, like opening people's mouths. No. And this takes away from people wanting to do what they find meaningful. I would like to be able to, have a job and maybe do freelance writing on the side because that's something I'm passionate about, something that I could make extra money with. This would take that away. This would take the meaningfulness of careers away from people.
And Republicans, conservatives have got to figure out how to articulate that, how to get to everyday people and say, hey, if you drive an Uber, we're actually for you. Or, hey, if you enjoy using Uber, we're actually for you. And get to union members and say, hey, did you know 1.3 billion went to Democrats? And I bet there's a 50% chance you're a conservative, not a Democrat. There's a better than 50% chance you voted for President Trump. If we can do that, if we can be smart about it, that will help us a whole lot going forward. All right, folks, that's about all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for joining us on WJ Live. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to click the subscribe button. After you click that, a little bell is going to show up. You can click that bell. That'll make sure you get notified every time we go live. If you've heard of shadow banning, click that little bell, and it's going to help get around the idea of shadow banning. Again, thanks to our friends at Patriot Depot for sponsoring us. Remember, WJ Live gets you 20% off. And we are powered by the Western Journal. Please read our stuff over at westernjournal.com. Just by going there, reading the articles, checking out the ads, you help us, you keep us in business. We are so grateful for that. If you feel led to support us in some way past that, you can go to westernjournal.com/subscribe. There's several options for you there where you can partner with us, help us get the truth out, and fight the left. We are here every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. This will be the last of it for this week. We hope you guys have a good weekend. For Olivia Brown and Cameron Arcan, I'm Josh Manning with the Western Journal. Have a nice weekend.